speaking on what you said about Polk, and then you mentioned Hood earlier. Reading on on the topic of the Atlanta campaign is just it's illuminating to see just how you mentioned that Davis wasn't a big fan of Johnston and he didn't like Beauregard, but he did like Hood, right? Like that was Hood was trying to curry favor a lot during that, right?
Well, I think he liked Hood. They had almost no personal no personal contact.
Okay.
They probably met once before the war when Hood was in Washington. That's not certain, but it's probable. They probably met once. I know they met once, maybe more, in 1862, briefly, during the Battle of Seven Pines or just before it. They may have met during the summer of 1862, but it would have been some brief social, reception or something. They really got acquainted in the winter of 1863, 1864. Hood had lost a leg at Chickamauga, and he was in Richmond recuperating, and they did meet then. He was the great hero, and all Richmond was just sort of gaga with Hood up there. Davis and Hood met. They apparently got along well together. It is often said that Davis rewarded Hood for being his accomplice against Johnston. That's simply not true. Braxton Bragg and James Longstreet both recommended Hood for promotion long before he got to Richmond, almost immediately after the Battle of Chickamauga. Bragg specifically asked that he be assigned to the Army of Tennessee, and Davis committed himself to do it before Hood got to Richmond. So it's obvious, that Davis didn't send him out there as his spy. Hood was the most distinguished major general in the Confederacy in the fall of 1863. And there was only one place for a newly promoted lieutenant general to go, and that was the Army of Tennessee. Hood seems to have become disillusioned with Joe Johnston as Johnston retreated and missed opportunities to fight Sherman. And probably by the time the Army crossed the Etowah River, Hood was convinced that it's one of these things where he is honestly convinced that this is bad and he is ambitious. So you got both of those. So,
what's the age difference between the two men?
Johnston and Hood. Johnston was born in 1807, Hood in 1831, 24 years, if I remember my math.
That's a good bit of, okay, so there's a generation or two.
Yeah, Johnston graduated from West Point in 1829, Hood in 1853.
And do you mentioned, the disillusionment with Johnston came from the constant retreating, giving up the land, and do you think that ultimately plays into Hood's strategy? Because he leads Franklin, right? I know we talked about Franklin earlier. So Franklin, when they're, when he's just sending guys, just go like charge. Do you think a part of that is just from him thinking about Johnston retreating constantly? This is just a knee-jerk, maybe not a knee-jerk reaction, but it's something it's been so to his mind that this doesn't work, so I have to do the opposite to just send my men out there. We have to get this land to make a stand.
I think when Hood took command of the Army in Atlanta, his model was Robert E. Lee. In fact, I argue in the biography of him that the influence of Lee was one of the great experiences that shaped Hood. I also argue that another great experience was his service in the battles in 1862. And in those battles and at Chickamauga, Hood had gained success by the headlong charge. At Gaines Mill, at Second Manassas, at Chickamauga, Hood had just charged. And he tried, when he took command in Atlanta, these flank movements. He did not go out in July and August 1864 to attack fortifications. He planned brilliantly to take advantage of mistakes Sherman had made. And all three times, Peachtree Creek, Atlanta, and Ezra Church, it didn't work because his subordinate generals messed up the plans. They didn't go where they were supposed to go. They attacked piecemeal. They attacked too soon. I argue that the generals in the Army of Tennessee were not good. There were some good ones, but on the whole, they did not measure up to the generals in the Army of Northern Virginia. And they didn't function as the generals in the Army of Northern Virginia did. And the Army of Tennessee could not execute these plans of maneuver that Hood worked out. He tried it around Atlanta. It didn't work. He took the army north to Tennessee, and at Spring Hill, it didn't work. He pulled a brilliant maneuver at Spring Hill. He marched around, got behind the Union Army, and then the whole thing just fell apart. Part of it was probably Hood's fault. He did not see that they did what he ordered them to do. But part of it was their fault. And I think that when they got to Franklin, he was just flat out frustrated. I have tried to get these jokers to maneuver here, do that. They can't do that. I did get success in 1862 with the headlong charge. Let's try it here. It probably wasn't that clear, but I think that's the pattern. And by the way, he was not on laudanum at Franklin. That much is clear.
Explain that for me.
Oh, okay. A lot of people argue.
Oh, the drug.
The drug.
Sorry,
yeah.
yes.
Hood was not on laudanum or any other drug. We know that now because we have a day-by-day account of the surgeon or the doctor who treated him after his leg was amputated. The only drug he mentions is a quarter grain of morphine for about 5 weeks after the leg was amputated, always at night, always to help him get to sleep. And then there's the entry, tonight he slept without morphine for the first time, and there's no more mention of morphine, and no mention at all of laudanum.
Gotcha.